But one evening, when an aged Jew, who had collapsed in merciful unconsciousness, was dragged out and flogged in the usual manner, Sir Oliver, chancing to behold the scarlet prelate who accompanied the Infanta looking on from the poop rail with hard, unmerciful eyes, was filled with such a passion at all this inhumanity, and at the cold pitilessness of that professed servant of the gentle and pitiful Saviour, that aloud he cursed all Christians in general, and that scarlet prince of the church in particular. He turned to the Moor beside him, and addressing him in Spanish, "Hell," he said, "was surely made for Christians, which may be why they seek to make earth like it." Fortunately for him, the creak and dip of the oars, the clank of the chains, and the lashes beating sharply upon the wretched Jew were sufficient to muffle his voice. But the Moor heard him, and his dark eyes gleamed. "There is a furnace 7 times heated awaiting them, O my brother," he replied, with a confidence which seemed to be the source of his present stoicism. "But art thou, then, not a Christian?" He spoke in that queer language of the North African seaboard, that lingua franca, which sounded like some French dialect interspersed with Arabic words. But Sir Oliver made out his meaning almost by intuition. He answered him in Spanish again, since although the Moor did not appear to speak it, yet it was plain he understood it. "I renounce from this hour," he answered in his fashion. "I will acknowledge no religion in whose name such things are done. Look me at that scarlet fruit of hell up yonder. See how daintily he sniffs at his pomander, lest his saintly nostrils be offended by the exhalations of our misery. Yet are we God's creatures, made in God's image like himself. What does he know of God? Religion he knows as he knows good wine, rich food, and soft women. He preaches self-denial as the way to heaven, and by his own tenets he is damned." He growled an obscene oath as he heaved the great oar forward. "A Christian? I?" he cried, and laughed for the first time since he had been chained to that bench of agony. "I am done with Christians and Christianity." "Verily we are God's, and to him shall we return," said he. That was the beginning of a friendship between Sir Oliver and this man, whose name was Yusuf bin Mokhtar. The Muslim conceived that in Sir Oliver he saw one upon whom the grace of Allah had descended, one who was ripe to receive the Prophet's message. Yusuf was devout, and he applied himself to the conversion of his fellow slave. Sir Oliver listened to him, however, with indifference. Having discarded one creed, he would need a deal of satisfying on the score of another before he adopted it, and it seemed to him that all the glorious things urged by Yusuf in praise of Islam he had heard before in praise of Christianity. But he kept his counsel on that score, and meanwhile his intercourse with the Muslim had the effect of teaching him the lingua franca, so that at the end of 6 months he found himself speaking it like a Mauritanian, with all the Muslim's imagery and with more than the ordinary seasoning of Arabic. It was towards the end of that 6 months that the event took place which was to restore Sir Oliver to liberty. In the meanwhile, those limbs of his, which had ever been vigorous beyond the common want, had acquired an elephantine strength. It was ever thus at the oar. Either you died under the strain, or your thews and sinews grew to be equal to their relentless task. Sir Oliver, in those 6 months, was become a man of steel and iron, impervious to fatigue, superhuman almost in his endurance. They were returning home from a trip to Genoa when, one evening, as they were standing off Minorca in the Balearic Isles, they were surprised by a fleet of 4 Moslem galleys which came skimming round a promontory to surround and engage them. Aboard the Spanish vessel there broke a terrible cry of "Asad ed-Din!" the name of the most redoubtable Moslem corsair since the Italian renegade Occhiali, the Ali Pasha who had been killed at Lepanto. Trumpets blared and drums beat on the poop, and the Spaniards in morion and corselet, armed with calivers and pikes, stood to defend their lives and liberty. The gunners sprang to the culverins, but fire had to be kindled and linstocks ignited, and in the confusion much time was lost, so much that not a single cannon shot was fired before the grappling irons of the first galley clanked